Thanks for joining me on this project. Check out the links below for a full material list. The first step in making our larger ball is going to be making up the individual components. And here you can see one of those components right here. So it's essentially a Rivoli bezel, and it's a bezel that then will connect to 5 other Rivoli bezels, and then you get this large and in charge wonderful decoration or pendant, or however you want to use it, because there are so many different possibilities with this. So I'm going to put this guy aside for now, and we're going to talk about the component. So the component is the Rivoli, and we have some DropDuos here, and then 15-0 seed beads here. I have the lab full, and I have some 11-0 seed beads and galvanized silver, or galvanized gold. First step is going to be to pick up 8 DropDuos, and between each one of those DropDuos, we're going to have 2 of our 11-0 seed beads in gold. I'm using Miyuki. I would suggest that you also use Miyuki, because if you use Toho, it may not quite fit the same way, and so I would definitely use the Miyuki first and learn the tutorial, and then try with a different kind of seed bead and experiment on your own. I do have a stop bead here at the end. So my stop bead, and then I have DropDuo, 2 11-0s, DropDuo, 2 11-0s, and I've repeated that 8 times. 8 DropDuos and 8 sets of 2 seed beads. So to finish this, I'm only going to need to pick up 2 more of my seed beads and let those fall down to the project. So now when I pick this all up, I'm going to go back through the very beginning here, through just that DropDuo. So let me get the pointed end of that DropDuo here. I'm not going to touch my stop bead. I'm going to go through my DropDuo, pull that all together, pull that all together, and now I'm going to go through the rest of my beads all in the same order in which I picked them up, and this will just serve to reinforce this initial group of beads. And with my stop bead hanging out there, that will help prevent my thread from traveling through the rest of my project and undoing everything that I've just done. So I'm just going to go through all these beads again, same order, just reinforcing the work that I've already done. As long as your beads don't have holes that are too tiny, like a 15 or a Charlotte, and as long as your thread isn't too thick, you should be able to reinforce once, twice, 3 times, whatever you feel is necessary. Now I feel like just 1 time is really going to be necessary for this project. I have my DropDuo here with my tail thread coming out on one side, the thread that I'm using to work with on the other side so I can give it a nice tight pull, and I'm pulling from opposite ends, cinching everything. So I feel pretty good about this first stage being stable to build the rest of my piece off of. I'm going to take my thread and needle, and I'm coming out the bottom of one of my DropDuos. I'm just going to pass through the top of one of those DropDuos. So now what this does is it has it's changed direction here. So now instead of working on this inside where I had the pointy end of my DropDuo, I'm now working at the more bulbous, thicker, and of my DropDuo. I'm going to use 4 15-0s, so 4 of my silvers here. This is the Labrador full. And in between each one of my DropDuos, oops, let me figure out where I am here. Okay, there we go. Very important to hold your project the correct way. So I've got 4 of my Labrador full seed beads on here. These are the 15-0s. And I'm just going to go through that next DropDuo. Give that a pull. And I'm going to continue on here, picking up 4 15-0s and passing through the next open hole in my round duo. So I'm going to continue with that until I get all the way back to the start, back to where I started, and then we will move on with the next step. I've gone around the whole outside of my DropDuos here. So now I've got my silver filled in all the way except for this last section here. So again, I've got my 4 15-0s, and to complete this round, I'm just going to pass through my DropDuo. And because I love reinforcing things so much, I'm going to pass through a few more beads here. The next section of 15-0s, the next DropDuo, and maybe the next section of 15-0s and DropDuo again. I just love reinforcing and cinching, making sure that I don't have anything loose or just anything not sitting the way I want it to. So if you ever have that issue with a project, reinforce, reinforce, reinforce. That will fix many of your problems. And it helps you start with a really clean, tight, neat base to move on to your next step. So now what I need to do, I bring up my little cheat sheet here. And so you can see now what we've done is we've created this nice frame for our rivoli. But that's all it is right now. It's just a nice little frame that's going to sit on top. It's not going to encase the rivoli. I don't have anything on here yet that's going to make it stay. And we're not using glue. We are definitely not doing that. We are going to bead around it and make it stay, make a bezel for this. So you can see here, I have the front section done, and along the side, I have essentially what is some netting cinched in the back here. So that's what we're going to work on now. Coming out of one of my DropDuos here, we're going to pick up 7 of our 15-0s. And odd numbers are always fantastic when you're doing netting because it means that you have a middle bead. And so when you're netting, a middle bead is the one that you're going to use to connect your next sections or your next rows. It's what you're going to use like in the next step. And those of you who do a lot of netting will understand what I mean. So I have my odd number here. I have my 7 15-0s. And I'm just going to go pass through my next DropDuo. And I'm going to do this the whole way around. So this is essentially the same as the last step we did, but instead of picking up 4 15-0s, we're picking up 7 15-0s. So go ahead and continue all the way around, and then I will meet you back here and we will continue on. I've gone around and added my sets of 7 beads. I have just one more here to add. So I've got those on my string, my thread already. And I'm going to go through my last DropDuo, through that outside hole, pull that tight. And now what I have is what looks like a lovely flower. It's really a lovely design that you could build off of and use this for a different kind of a project. But for our purposes, we need to keep going and make this a bezel. So in order to do that, I'm going to take my needle and thread, And I'm coming out of one of my DropDuos here. And I'm going to pass through the first 4 in that set of 7 15-0s that I just added. Can be a little tricky to get your needle in there. But what I'm doing is going through the first 4 in that set of 7, and the 4th bead there at the top there, that's the center in that group of 7, so that's always going to be that bead that we're working with as we do our next step here. We always want that center bead. I'm going to pick up 3 15-0s, and I can show you here what we're working on now. We've just added our groups of 7, and by picking up that middle bead and adding 3 in between of each one, we're going to be able to cinch this, pull it back, and have that cover the back of our rivoli. So pick up 3 of our 11-0s, pass through the center or 4th in the group of 7, give that a pull, and continue on here with another 3 11-0s. Find that 4th or center bead and give that a little pull. You don't have to pull too tightly now, we just want to get all of our beads in place. Anytime that you're doing a bezel, you don't want to make the back or the front, whichever side you're ending on, whichever is the last side you're doing, you don't want to pull it too tight because then you're not going to be able to put your stone or your crystal in after the fact. You always want to make sure that you wait to pull tight once you get your stone or rivoli in. Amateur mistake, but everyone's made it. So I'm going to go ahead and continue on adding my sets of 3 15-0s, 3 11-0s, and then we will continue on with the next step. So I'm onto my last section here, my last group of 3 11-0s. So I'm going to take that section or that group of 3 11-0s, and I'm going to pass through that same 15-0 where I started. And that will connect my whole back here so that now I have a nice ring connecting 3 11-0s, a 15, 3 11-0s, a 15, etc., all the way around. I'm going to, if you haven't guessed, I'm going to reinforce this now. And I'm going to go through all of the seed beads that I just passed through. So I'm going through my 15s and my 11s. Now before you get too far in this, go ahead and drop in your rivoli. And of course you want to put it in upside down because we're working on the back here. So when you flip it, it'll look just like it's supposed to. So let's go ahead and reinforce the back here. I think that is the word of this video. Reinforce. If there was a trivia contest, what is Anna's favorite word? Reinforce might be it. It does so much to help your project, and it is one of the easiest things for any beginner beader to do to make a huge impact on how their projects turn out. So the first lap around here, as I reinforce the back here and just pass through all these beads again, I'm just going to go through, pull tight, nothing really special. But then after I've gone through all of those beads, I'm going to go through again, but I'm going to go through only my only my 11-0s. So I'm going through only the gold beads. They're gold for me. You may use a different color. Whichever color they are, we're going through only the 11-0 beads. And then that will cinch them closer together. So we can keep cinching this in and making it tighter and just bringing these beads up higher over the back of the bezel and it makes it look neater, it holds it in better, just makes everything sit a little bit better. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that, reinforce that a couple times, just the 11 O's, and then I'm going to work on the front just a little bit more before this one is ready to go, and I can move on to another section. After I finish reinforcing the back and I've reinforced all of my 11 O's, you want to take a look at the front and just do a little check and make sure that everything looks like it's about where it needs to be. We've been squishing these beads a lot as we work with them, and now that we have the back nice and just where everything needs to be, it would be a good idea to just look at the front and see if there's any little tweaks you can make to make sure everything is good. So what I'm going to do is just take my thread and needle, and I'm going to follow my thread path through my 15-0 seed beads here and go to the front. So I'm going to pass through this outside hole of my DropDuo. And the number one thing that you can do if anything doesn't look quite right on the front is just to follow this thread path again through your DropDuos and your 15-0 seed beads. You're going to go through these 15-0 seed beads again, these particular ones here that are on the outside. You're going to go through them again when you connect all of your components. So I don't want you to go through them so many times and go crazy with reinforcing to the point where you can't fit any more thread or needle through those beads. But if you see something that looks a little wonky and you want to just kind of make sure that those beads are sitting correctly, a lot of times running your needle and thread back through there will just help settle everything, get it to lay correctly, and again, just reinforce that. So I may do that once here, and then I will be ready to start my next component. I am now done with the top of my piece, and all I've done is just go through those beads, and all that did was help me to keep my seed beads in line, and I feel much better with the overall silhouette of my component now. So everything is in place and I'm happy with it. I'm going to just take my needle off the thread that I have. I'm not going to cut this thread down. I probably won't need all of this thread, but I'm not going to cut it all down because I'm going to use it to connect all of my pieces together, all of my components, when I have all 6 of them done. So go ahead and gather some more rivolis that you want to use. You're going to need 6 in total for one different color rivoli for each side of your ball. You can, of course, do all the same color or just a few different colors, but there's something really fun and magical about having them all different. I would also play around with different shapes, textures, maybe not shapes, they do have to be rivolis, but I would play around with some different coatings. So you may have some that are just a plain one color, some that are a bee finish, some that are opal, some that have a little bit more iridescence to them, or special finishes, crackle finishes, whatever you can find. I would play around and assemble a grouping of more than 6 so that when you start to play around with them, you can see how they really look together and then make your decision based on how they look in person together. So go ahead and make 5 more, 6 total, 5 more of these components, and then we will come back together and put them all together. Now that I've finished bezeling 6 rivolis, now I can start putting them together, and this is where the fun really happens. I have 3 that are already connected here, so you can see how I've just connected them one next to each other. And so I'm going to do the same with these 3 down here. I'm going to start by just adding a needle to the thread that I had left already on there. And then I'm going to line up with another rivoli. I'm going to take this rivoli, I'm going to line it up with another bezeled rivoli, and I prefer to line it up so that I am leaving the tail thread on this other rivoli farthest away from me. That'll just make sure that that tail thread is in a position to help me connect to the next rivoli in line without having to take my thread back through my project. It's already in the place where I need it. So I've got my tail thread coming out here, and I'm just going to line it up. And what I'm connecting are my 15-0 seed beads. So I think I mentioned earlier, don't go through your 15-0 seed beads on the edge here too much. I do like to go through them once after I've completed the rivoli bezel, just to kind of get everything back in line and adjusted. But you don't want to overdo that because you're going to have to go through them again here. So what I'm going to do is just line it up here. My thread is coming out of the right side here. So on the opposite rivoli here, I'm just going to go through those 4 seed beads, those 4 15-0s, from the right to the left. And you can see it's just pulling those together. Oops. And then back through on the other rivoli here. So I'm just connecting them. There's really nothing very special here. So you can see my thread path here. Out one side, through the other, and back down through the other. So I'm just circling around connecting them. Nothing fancy. I do want to do this a couple times. This is going to be the point where your whole finished piece is being connected. And this is the point where if anything happens, the pieces are going to fall apart from each other. So don't be afraid to go through here multiple times to make sure that you get that connection really secure and tight. Now I had already cut off and finished the extra thread that I had on here where I had my stop bead. If you do still have that tail by your stop bead, this is a great point to take your thread and your needle, and then wherever you have your stop bead, join this extra thread to where you have your stop bead and tie it off there. And then you can also, if you feel you need to, you can also at this point reinforce or just go back through these seed beads if you feel like when you took your stop bead off it got a little loose. So you've got plenty of thread here to go back through here if you need to and tie up your stop bead. So that's where I would suggest doing that. I've already done that. I already have my stop bead off of here. So what I'm going to do is just take my thread and needle, because I don't need to use this thread anymore. I'm done with it. So I'm just going to take it through a couple of beads and tie it off. But as you find a place to tie off your thread, keep in mind that on each one of these corners, you're going to be connecting another rivoli. So you don't want to have any knots or anything that is going to get stuck in the middle of these 15-0s and prevent you from traveling through them. So as I tie off my thread, I'm not going to tie off my thread on any one of these 4 corners. I'm always going to tie it off somewhere in the middle of the project here in the circle of my gold 15-0s, or in the set of 15-0s directly to the right or the left of where I've made a connection, because I will not be going through these 15 rows again. So I'm going to continue on like this and add my next rivoli. So I'm just going in a straight line here. I'm going to add my rivoli here to the opposite side of my rivoli in the middle here. So I've got one rivoli on this side and one rivoli here. And then we will attach 2 sections of 3 together. I now have on my mat 3 sets of rivolis, or 2 sets of 3 rivolis that are strung connected together. So if you remember back to maybe kindergarten, 1st grade, when you would cut out paper and make cubes out of it, at least that's what I did. What you do is you make 4 sides and you have a top and a bottom. So what we're going to do is we're going to take one of these sections of 3 and we're going to connect it to the center rivoli on our other set of 3. And then that will give us our 4 sides of our cube and our top and our bottom. So I've got my thread here, my extra thread here that I've added my needle to, and I'm just going to go ahead and just, as I did with all the other connections, attach these 2 rivolis together. So let me get them in the position here where it's comfortable for me to work. And I'm just going to make this connection here. So just through these seed beads, through the 15 O's, same as we've been doing. And back through the 15 O's. Back through again, just to make sure that we have a nice strong connection. And at this point, it feels a little floppy because you've got a bunch of rivolis connected to each other. But we're going to make sure that everything gets connected and it creates a nice, beautiful cube. So now that I have that connection done, this is how your cube is going to get formed. As I said, you've got the 4 sides and the top and the bottom here. So if we pick this side up and we pick this side up, it'll form into a beautiful cube. Now the trick here is just going to be making all the connections that we need to make. And there are multiple ways to do that. There is no right or wrong way in doing this. You just need to make sure that you travel with your thread and your needle to all those connection points and secure them. So I've secured this connection. So if I take a look here, if I bring this up, maybe my next connection point that makes sense is to do this one here. It won't take me much traveling through my project to get to that connection point. So I'm just going to take my thread and needle, and I'm traveling on the outside here of my project till I get to that connection point. So I mentioned in the previous clip that if you are tying off your thread, you could use these sets of 15 O's here. You can, but I would actually try to avoid it. I probably misspoke earlier because you're not going to be using them again, but you may need to use them to travel to some of the other connection points, unless you cut yourself a new piece of thread every time you do one of these connections, which is also possible. So now I've got this connection. So you're always going to have the set of, you're always going to have one of these sets of 4 15 O's in between the connections. So you're never going to have a connection and then have another connection directly next to it. So here's my other connection point here. And I'm going to just do this just like I did for all the other ones. Around, back around again, up one side, down the other, pull it tight, and make sure you don't have any slack so that connection is nice and tight. Okay, so now you can see this is going to hold itself up, and that is going to form a corner of my ball. I've been calling it a ball, but it's really a cube. It just looks like a ball because it's so nice and rounded. So then maybe logically I would take this and I would see, okay, what other connection point, if I fold this, where now is my thread closest to? And that might be this connection point here. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take my needle and thread, travel through my project till I get to this connection point, and connect those as I did all the other ones. So continue on connecting, making all those points connected, and then we will do the last one together. Now we have our connections all done except for one. So we have a lid essentially on our little box here. This is only connected, only one hinge is connecting this. So we have the opportunity at this point to either completely close it up and finish making those connections or hinges, or what we can do is we can think about if we want to add something in this box. You could add something like rose quartz, a nice gemstone that has healing properties, or you could do a bell, something that'll make it rattle. If you don't have anything like a bell, I would suggest some seed beads. Seed beads have a nice rattly sound to them. These are just 6/0s, and if I pour just a couple in there and then close this up, it'll make a nice little rattle sound that just gives you a soft rattle sound. It's not too obnoxious. But if you want something obnoxious, you can also find something that makes a greater sound. There's also a bunch of other things that you can pull from your stash. So I found that a cup button and a little crystal worked really well, just a couple briolettes, and then gemstones. These are gemstone chips, so they're a little bit harder. They make a little bit different sound, a little bit louder. So it depends on what you want to do with this. You can put a little incense or something in here. Lots of different things that you can do. So just something to consider before you go ahead and close this up and you have lost the opportunity to add something in there. So what I'm going to do now is just finish it up. Finally needed to add some more thread. So I'm just going to go in here, make those final connections, and then my ball will be completely done. My ball or my box. So I'm going to make these last connections on the top here. So I already have one here. So I'll make one here, here, and here. And then I am completely done and ready to hang this and enjoy this all year round. I hope you enjoyed making this Windows of the Sun pendant or decoration. So I'm going to show you how I finished mine off. What I did was I just took a head pin, so just a simple head pin, and I added a 6mm pearl to the bottom and the top of that head pin as I ran through just the center of the pendant. And then what I did was I topped that off with just a simple little wrapped loop. I used another head pin, and what I did was just create a little loop at the bottom of that head pin and gave it a nice wide curve so it kind of simulates an ear wire. And what this will allow me to do is hang it. So I can hang it on a branch, or I can hang it on some fishing line and hang it in a window. Really anywhere you want to add it as a decoration. Also a beautiful ribbon will look nice on it. So go ahead and make it your own and hang it wherever you want to, and let the sun bounce off of all of those beautiful color rivolis, so it truly is a window to the sun.